All right, welcome back to the Contrarians. We have another great panel discussion for you today. This is a Dark Horse album. We're talking about Saint Anger by Metallica. It's an infamous album and one I'm really excited to hear people's opinions about. If you like the Contrarians, if you want to help the channel grow, there's the like button, there's a subscribe button, you can share with your friends. Most importantly, though, what we really want to see is people join the conversation in the comments. There's always a second debate, second set of reviews, in the comments, and we want you to be a part of it. So please do comment. Let us know what you think. There are other ways to support the channel in the description below. Check that out if you'd like to. But most importantly, we just want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank each of our panelists for being here today as well. So Dark Horse format, each of our panelists is going to get a few minutes to give a concise review of the album. They'll give it a rating out of 10. And then when we reach the end, we will do a little bit of an average and see what the consensus for the album was. So let's start today with Sean. Sean, why don't you take it away and give us your review of Saint Anger?
Okay, well, again, thanks again for having me. It's always cool. I'm like, hey, there's those guys I see in all those other clips on the internet. But anywho, I did my homework as I was 29 ramble. There was one of these that I was in where whatever it was I said it like over and over 20 times in the thing. But hold up, there it is from my car, old car CD case. There it is, Saint Anger. But I re-listened to it last night, and you were saying it has a complicated history. True, because I remember everybody everybody kind of hated on it early, and I know I did and thought I really hated it, and I listened to it again, and okay, I do have I'll trim it down, but I've got at the top that Lars owes me for Tylenol. The riffs are good. It's heavy. Like I just heard the new released Metallica song that they just dropped, that Suicide in My Head or whatever it is, Suicide something or other. And this album's a lot more interesting. That song's good. There's a good solo on it and all that, but it sounds, I don't know, it's not as interesting. Although if this somehow or another got redropped, this album, and they took out Lars beating a trash can with a baseball bat out of it, where everything is clang, 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 clang in every single song for whatever reason. I don't know music instruments, so I don't know. Is that a tom? Who told him, yeah, that's a good idea? Let's keep doing that over and over. Clown from Slipknot was in this, helping to record it, I guess. I don't know. But anywho, skimming through my notes, I was like, how they accuse Slayer of Diabolus and Musica of being their new metal album. I think this was maybe 5 years too late, but this was Metallica's new metal album. I mean, it doesn't have solos in it. It's like gent. Again, I don't know enough about music to know if it's really down-tuned, but I mean, it seems that way. It's like really heavy. Yeah, that part's good. If you could just take the drum nonsense out of it. There were some good ones, like put a star next to it. I had to look up the title because it's not the single on it, but Sweet Amber, which is track 8. I've got a couple of stars. It's not bad. It's got kind of a twangy intro bit. I have marked the drums aren't as crappy. I don't know. I don't know, they must have listened to Pantera right before this song came, before they recorded this, and said, I wonder if we can do Pantera except without a solo on it. So I don't know. It's better. It's still not in the top of the catalog. So it's complicated. I don't know. I'd probably say like maybe a 6 out of 10. It's like I would put Reload below it. There's some really just dogs on that album. This at least was listenable all the way through. It was interesting. It kept my attention. Granted, the Lars needs to get it the heck out of this album here. Someone needs to turn him down about 3 steps, but and solos would have been nice, but it was still pretty decent. at its worst, though, it sounded like, I can't remember what that station is on XM, but there's the one that plays like all the, because I'm of a certain age where I have a certain soft spot for like 90s new metal. I'll admit it. And so at its worst, some of this sounds like D-grade, like Taproot or something, or like Metallica's trying to be Breaking Benjamin or something. But anyway, I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Interesting. I've seen the documentary, The Some Kind of Monster, and I understand maybe that explains a lot of the nonsense going on behind the recording of this. And it's a wonder they ever got it recorded at all, I guess. But 6 out of 10.
Nice. Cool.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. That was great. It's a very reasonable rating too, I think. Yeah, that's probably I think what I can't remember the outlets that gave it that, but I saw a lot of the similar ratings when I was looking it up. Let's go to Peter next. Peter, your review, Saint Anger.
Yeah. All right, thank you. I guess I have to put a little bit of context with my relationship with Metallica and leading up to this album. So my experience with Metallica was listening to Hit the Lights in 1984, and that was like pow, gold nuggets of metal riffage. And I went on a journey with that band, Kill 'Em All, Ride the Lightning, and probably the peak, Master of Puppets. Sheer energy, bounce, drive. It was something that you just didn't hear. Like it was like Judas Priest on amphetamines. The impact that made to people listening and liked hard rock and heavy metal in that era is insurmountable. So then you had the death of Cliff Burton and things started to change, and Justice for All, the albums were starting to get a bit longer. That clocked in at 65 minutes and 24 seconds. It had a very dry mix. There was no bass. Then you had Black Album, which was like a commercial juggernaut, sold millions of copies. Good, solid hard rock album. I wouldn't say it was thrash, but it was good, solid hard rock. But things definitely started to change. Reload, Load, Metallica had the Napster issue, and at the time, it seemed like a bit of an arse move, but in hindsight, they were really brave, and they were probably vindicated. And then, in the early 2000s, you had Metallica change somewhat. You had this documentary, Some Kind of Monster, which was the background between James Hetfield going into rehab and he had alcoholism, Jason Newsted leaving the band, a new bass player coming in, and the band almost breaking up. And this was in the era of reality TV, Survivor, Big Brother. I don't know if that really sat really well with me to see one of my favorite bands in a reality show and in a warts and all documentary, because it was very exposed. And to me, there's a bit of a fine line, because I like the mystique of a band, and I think the invisible wall was kind of broken. It was very revealing. It was very raw, and you saw a lot of different sort of a different side to some members of the band. And I think that kind of tainted a lot of people's opinions of Metallica. Anyway, I think the reason why I'm talking about Some Kind of Monster is because intrinsically it's this is like the soundtrack to this album, Saint Anger. This album is a therapy album. It is basically 75 minutes and 4 seconds of psychobabble. The lyrics, it's just like, my lifestyle is my death style. It's all sort of word grabs. It is a very boring album. There are no guitar solos, no memorable riffs, and it's melody free. And I totally understand where they were coming from, and coming from a different angle of doing something completely different to the early days of Metallica, because the early days of Metallica were drawing on the new wave of British heavy metal and a little bit of punk and drawing that energy. And they had, it was a fertile playground of all these different bands that were influencing them. In 2002, when they were making this album, it was a bit of a wasteland. I looked at the rock charts in 2002 to see what rock bands were making the top 50, and I saw Audioslave, I saw Nirvana's Greatest Hits, and I saw Foo Fighters, and then not much else. There was Coldplay, Britney Spears, Mariah Carey. It's not much for them to play. And they were trying to do something, I understand, a little bit different and a little bit more stripped down. But the album, I've got to just be critical of the album. It's a real bit of an endurance test. It's all very one note. And I've got to mention it, and you're going to hear this consistently, well, I assume throughout this discussion, that drum sound. Whoever made that decision, it's one of the worst decisions in rock history. Seriously. And Lars Ulrich's drumming sounds a bit sloppy. It's almost just a notch above the Shags. Check that out on YouTube. When you've got that really bad drum sound, no matter how good the songs are, your ear's going to be listening to that clank, 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 clank on that snare, that really tight snare. And you're not going to get past that. It's just annoying. So in summary, this sounds like an album that was very painful to make, and the documentary attests that there was a lot of crap that was going on. And in result, it's a bit of an ordeal for the listener. And I can only give it about a 2 out of 10.
Wow.
All right.
Awesome.
Yeah. That's great.
Sorry.
No, that's awesome. That's what I was hoping we would see. Like Sean, your review is great, and that's why I said it's very reasonable. But this, these sort of responses, this is great. We can get some conversation going. So let's go to Tim next. And we'll get your review, and we'll see if you continue that trend, or if maybe you've got a contrarian review. Let's find out. Tim, floor is yours.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, this it's funny. I this came up as a topic. I'm like, oh yeah, I want to go on and talk about Saint Anger. Like, I really have no idea what I was going to say, because in a lot of ways, and I mean this, I don't know what I think of this album. I bought it when it first came out. I was waiting for it. It's not an album. It's not an album that can be just easily either dismissed or easily praised. It's a completely singular experience. And within the Metallica catalog, it stands way to one side. I don't know what side it's on, but you don't if there were a Metallica box set or a compilation, there's no mistaking tracks from Saint Anger. And that snare sound, almost, I had this thought today when I was listening to a couple of the songs, and that's another thing. That snare sound almost produces a note on its own. It's almost like you could almost say, oh yeah, well that's an F sharp, or that's D flat. I don't know what it is, but it's like like it's not just a drum sound. And very rarely, whatever note it is, very rarely does that note jive with what the guys are playing. And I think it's all like drop C. Like, I think they're down tuned, and then they drop the low note a step, like all the new metal bands do, so you can make the chords with one finger. The no solos thing was really, and Kirk Hammett actually stands up for himself in this. Excellent documentary, warts and all. Look at the band. I've watched Some Kind of Monster way more than I've listened to Saint Anger. Let's put it that way. Kirk actually says that dates the album to this moment. And it's true. It really does. And it doesn't even date it to 2003, because that was already going on since the late 90s. So I don't know what that decision made. Would solos have improved the album? I don't know. It wouldn't have sounded any different, but it does make for some really long songs that don't need to be that long. They don't go through that many movements. There is a lot of repetition. And, Bob Rock has even said he had the band come in and they had no songs. So they're literally making stuff up on the spot. I have to mention this. When this album first came out, I think the guy's name is Matt Smith. He put out a hilarious but dead-on parody of Saint Anger. If you go on YouTube now, type in Saint Anger parody, I think it's about 1.5 minutes long. It's hilarious. And like most good parodies, the reason it's hilarious is because it's not that far off. But having said that, I really like Frantic and Saint Anger, the first two tracks. They're probably my favorite two tracks on the album. I was excited, when I first was listening to that. I'm like, all right, they survived. Now, it wasn't until the documentary came out that I realized just how bad it was and just how close they came to breaking up. But they survived. It was a tough period, Jason leaving, and, why did Jason leave? He's talked about that in recent years, him and James, James not wanting him to do his side projects and, keeping an iron fist on everything. And then, the Napster thing was kind of, it's funny, they looped the Napster thing in, but that was kind of dead and gone by the time, that was 3 years before St. Anger came out. But anyway, it's all in there. They had Phil Toll, their guru, their Dr. Landy figure. But anyway, I really do enjoy the documentary, Some Kind of Monster. I thought it was fascinating. Maybe coming out of it, it's like, do I want to know that much about a band? I'll tell you right now, knowing too much about a band can really dampen your enthusiasm for listening to them. It's really tough right now to be a Journey fan. I wish Neil Sean and Jonathan Cain would just get in a cage and fight it out and be done with it rather than, all that pissing and moaning in the press. But anyway, St. Anger. I think the best thing I can say about this is to quote my good friend Matt. We were working on my book because he's the one that designed it for me. And he said, just put something on. He had a bunch of CDs ripped to his computer. And I'll put on St. Anger. I haven't listened to that in a while. We only got about 3 songs in, and Matt says, we got to put on something else. And he said, and this sums up, I think, my relationship with this album. He crystallized. He said, I like this album, but it pisses me off. And I think what he means by that is, like, it's about the worst thing to listen to if you're trying to work. You can't put that on and listen to it and get anything else done. It just demands your attention. And even when I was listening to this album to prepare for this, in all honesty, I can only handle about 3 or 4 songs, and I got to switch to something else and then listen to the rest of it. It's harsh. It is a harsh recording, and it fits the material. It's the sound of what was going on in Hetfield's mind, I think, and it was not a pleasant place to be at that period. Again, it's Metallica, so there's a certain amount of professionalism brought to the fore. There are moments that I really, really like, but I think every song on this album could probably stand to have 2 minutes trimmed off, 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes trimmed off every song, because it's not as if it's, these are 7-minute songs that go through all these different movements. They're just repeating and just beating you over the head with the riff and beating you over the head with the drum sound. I don't know. It's really, really tough to think about. I really like everything they've done since then, and I'm excited about the new album. This, I think, is something that they had to get out of their system. As far as the sound quality goes, I actually think that, and this is one of the first albums I remember getting that had a DVD come with it. And the DVD, if people don't know, is the band in the rehearsal studio playing the entire album. And I actually think that sounds a little bit better than the album itself. I think it's a little bit easier on the ears. It's not, it's not a 100% improvement, but it's just not quite as, that frequency, it's like he's banging on the snare drum and banging on your head at the same time. And it's like, whoa. So what am I going to rate this? Wow, I didn't even think about this, but I think I got to be brutally honest. And I'm going to give Saint Anger a 6.5. And most of those points deducted are for the sound and no solos, and the songs are too long. I don't really think there are any bad songs on here per se. I'd love to hear something done with this album similar to what Rush did with the Vapor Trails album, put out a remixed version of this. But I don't know if that's ever going to happen. But anyway, I think 6.5 is pretty generous for this album. They would, it was a phase they went through, and it's a fascinating period, but doesn't mean I return to it all that much.
Nice.
Awesome. Yeah. Another very reasonable, I think, rating for this album. Thanks, Tim. David, and we were having some audio issues earlier. Moment of truth. Let's see.
All right. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Holy mackerel, Andy. Yeah.
There we go.
Round of applause for handling some technical issues. All right. Got rid of the AirPods. I don't know what was going on, but we're back. Okay. So I'll be relatively brief only because I think Tim and the folks ahead of me a lot of what I was going to say up pretty good about this record. I mean, I think that this record to me, and I hadn't revisited it in a while since it came out. It's been on the shelf. In fact, here's my vinyl copy, and it still has cellophane on it. That tells you how many times I've listened to it. But kind of a completist going to have it in the collection, but have never tried to tackle that on the turntable. But I think that it's difficult. It's a difficult album to get through sonically. For me, I think that the snare sound, I mean, I want to take Lars' advice and just get over it, and I just can't. It's there, and it's very distracting, and it's pounding, and it's up front, and so from a production standpoint and sonically, it's difficult. Even the songs that I like better than others, that ever-present snare is painful, and it's difficult, and I found it hard to. I think Tim summed it up pretty good in some of the things he said. It's hard to get through. I find myself, it's exhausting. It's not really an album that even in preparation for this panel that I could get through in one sitting, and it's difficult. And I think, but it's also honest. And I think that it's while I don't like a lot of the elements and a lot of the things that I hear are things that for me personally weren't of musical interest for me. I hear a lot of the new metal, was brought up earlier. It's industrial in a lot of ways. Sometimes I feel like James is borderline rapping on some songs. Sometimes I'll hear him singing and I'm like, this is pretty good. All of a sudden he's rapping or something, or there's some kind of scat over the vocal line and I don't know what's happening. And it just sounds angry and slow rappy. And that's sort of a turnoff for me. Now I know some people like, those elements in their music and it's all sort of subjective, but for me, you're bringing a lot of musical elements of the time that weren't very appealing to what I like to listen to, made it even more difficult. That said, I think Frantic and Purify were two songs that in going through seemed to be ones I could get through all the way. I seemed to go, those are pretty good songs for me. I liked Saint Anger, I liked Sweet Amber, but there were parts of those songs where I had to stop. Like it was like I liked it until I didn't like it. So they're kind of half and half, and the rest of it was really difficult, I think. But again, I'll go back to the honesty. I think that, with a lot of bands, when they go really off of sort of what their classic sound is, they're maybe chasing a trend. Hey, I want to sell more records, so I'm going to do an 80s metal band all of a sudden has a grunge record in 1995 or something like that. And it just comes off very contrived. This doesn't come off contrived like, hey, I want to be Korn. This comes off like, this is who we are in this moment. And I think that with the context of maybe the movie and kind of understanding where this band was at in terms of busting at the seams, and Jason's gone and you got your producer playing bass and we don't have songs and all of this and there's all this pressure and stress and anger and all these emotions. I think this is really good. As painful as it is to listen to, it's a authentic record that's really who they were in that moment. And for that, I think it has value. So I'm going to give it a couple bonus points for being authentic and not being contrived. And hey, this isn't Metallica purposely trying to chase to be a new metal band, right? Because that's fake and contrived. I don't think that's that at all. So that said, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5, and with a bonus point for being authentic.
Nice.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks. That was great. All right. Well, we've definitely got a trend here forming. Martin, I actually have a quick review that I want to do for this episode. So would you like to go last or would you like to go next?
You go ahead.
All right. We'll give you the last word. All right. So I will be very brief because I don't want to ramble about this. Metallica is my favorite subject. Maybe Iron Maiden is. It's hard to say. But this album is really interesting for me because I would say at different points listening to this album, have fluctuated between a 2, a 6, and an 8 on this album, and it's a really interesting. It's a really interesting thing for me because I feel like I had several questions about my childhood taste in music answered for me. Like Peter, when you were talking about a barren landscape in 2002, 2003. Well, at that time, I'm about 12, 13. I don't want to do the math, but that's formative years, starting to really strike out and buy my own CDs, and Saint Anger is probably one of the only really accessible in every store, on Much Music. Much Music, MTV equivalent for our American watchers. It's prevalent. I could talk about it with my friends, and at that point, that was an 8. It was also my first experience with Metallica, other than hearing Enter Sandman on the radio. So at that point, I was really, really, really excited about it. And then we discovered Master of Puppets, and then we discovered Injustice for All, and then we discovered Ride the Lightning, and so on. And it dropped down to a 2 because it's so different. But listening again today, I think I have to give this a 7. I don't want to give it a 6 because my major problem with it is the same problem that was mentioned here. A lot of the songs go on too long, and they're very repetitive and they're boring. But I've come to the realization that is that really that bad of a problem if I just skip to the next song? If I got my 2 minutes, 3 minutes of enjoyment out of the song, am I obligated to listen to the rest of it? I don't really feel that way. So today I listened to it, and when I got bored of the songs, I skipped to the next one, and I had a really great experience, like really great. There's a lot of fresh and fun, interesting ideas on this record. Almost every song has something really fun to it. But it just doesn't have enough in each song to put it together. Like if you took maybe 2 or 3 of these songs, chopped them in half, and stuck them together and made a 6-minute song, it'd be pretty good. There's a lot of interesting things going on here rhythmically, a lot of like very sudden and abrupt changes. Everyone loves Frantic, and Frantic is a great example of just all of a sudden frantic, tick, tick, tick. It has a lot going for it, and my only problem with it is that it goes on too long. I can fix that problem now really easily on my own. So I'm going to give it a 7. I think it's a heavy album. Regarding the snare, it's really interesting. I don't know why this happens. I can tune it out, and I can't really do that for most things. But it just sort of, I guess since I was listening to it so early at such a young age, it doesn't seem that weird to me. It's different, but it doesn't seem that weird to me. And I don't really mind it, but I can see that is very much not the case for most people. So I'll take that point into consideration and take it down from an 8 to a 7. That's my review, and I'll pass it right over to Martin next, and we'll give him the final word. So Martin, take it away.
Okay, so one thing I like about this is that this doesn't happen with bands anymore. But you look back on the history of Metallica, and you now have a band sort of like the 70s, where you can say there are vast differences between a bunch of the albums, and I really appreciate that with this album because and moving on to what sort of enjoyment I can get out of it before we move to Sonics and stuff like that. There are large tracks of Load and Reload I don't need to hear again for 2 reasons. Don't like the song, or I'm sick of them. I don't think I really need to hear Justice too much anymore. I always kind of had it in for the Black Album, was never a big fan. I like the new stuff a lot, and my favorites Ride. I love Master. I don't think I really have to listen to the first one too much anymore. So this sits in there in a pretty decent place in terms of something I can go back to and still get a fair bit out of. Now, I want to address the no solos thing. So I was going through it again today, and I didn't miss the solos for some reason, and then I had to actually read that there were no solos. So it put a funny thing in my mind where it's almost like they're giving you a meditative experience. It's almost like ambient heavy metal when you take out the solos. It's almost like if you put the solos in, you are, as they explained, if we put the solos in, it's not like we're doing it live. It's a little bit like a Van Halen situation or whatever, where you're saying, oh, well, this is us just jamming or whatever. But the point is that I didn't miss them, and it almost makes you focus more on the song. So that was a funny thing. It's almost like if they put the solos in, that's a cliche kind of thing. So they're going against a cliche there. Now, when it comes to the drum sound, the snare sound, so what he's doing is he's just turned the snares off the snare. As he says, I turned them off, kind of like the sound. It was a snap decision. We spent 15 minutes tuning up the drums. I'm going to maybe say something that's even wrong here, but because I didn't research it properly, but I could have. But I could swear that it's not even, that snare sound is not there on Frantic, and it's not there all throughout the album. It changes, I think, throughout the album. But I don't think it's on Frantic, believe it or not. I don't know. Go take a listen. But so the thing with that sound is again, it's kind of the same thing where I'm thinking, what are the options? The options are having just a snare sound that nobody talks about and nobody notices, right? I know it's distracting, but I don't hate it, and I can tune it out. And Tim has now probably ruined it for me by saying it's a note. I love that sort of explanation, right? But it's the truth of the matter is I'm kind of happy they did it. Now Lars's explanation of why he stands by it, because it was 100% the truth at the time. That part I don't really buy. But when James says we did that, and now you can look back on our history and we've got an album that sounds like this, that's exactly what I said at the beginning. And that's what I love about a lot of catalogs from the 70s, right? The rest of the production, it's also got kind of a manic, strange ride cymbal hi-hat end of things, and it's got its own version of having no bass in a way too. There's no bass articulation. There's a little bit of new metal bass sometimes when they do mellow stuff, but other than that, it does feel pretty new metal to me. And David, I'm kind of like half of your opinion, where I'm saying they are doing it because new metal's cool, and part of it is it's honest at the same time. So that's kind of like the Rush thing, where you're doing it because you're enthusiastic about some new music out there and you want to try this new art. You want to try it out for yourself, right? But I'll quickly, so I'll just agree again. The whole idea of this is a band that now really abuses the idea of having the songs be way too long. They still do it now on the albums that we like, right? But they definitely do it on here. I love, Nick, your explanation of how you can just edit your own version and go through it and have a good enjoyment of it. It's 75 minutes long, right? So knock out your own 25 minutes, right? But I'll tell you, as a total clue to that, you listen to Frantic and you're listening along. It's 5 minutes and 50 seconds long. When you get to 4:42 and he does another round of that mellow part there, everybody, I think, would go, this song should be over right there. That's where you end it. It has this great heavy sort of climax, and then all of a sudden, life goes, or whatever that thing is, right? With the little new metal bass, the Mudvayne bass or whatever it is, right? So yeah, every song is kind of like that, but I love that song. I love Dirty Window, Invisible Kid. I like My World. I love Sweet Amber. I think that's really good. I think it ends super, super good with Unnamed Feeling and Purify. There's some stilted proggy sort of rhythms in there. I know Lars does some interesting things where throughout this album, I noticed where he plays a super fast beat against a riff that is kind of mid-paced. Like he'll do double time to a lot of times riffs that should be played at time, right? On this, it's really funny, and then there's a lot of cool change-ups and stuff. So yeah, at the time when it came out, I gave it an 8 out of 10. I don't really maybe stand by an 8, but I'm not going to go much lower than a 7 because I'm glad this exists in the catalog, and I'm glad that it's just something really oddball and strange in here. And I love Tim's thing about, I don't know how to rate this thing. It's kind of that way as well. And that it pisses you off kind of thing. Right. But, you think of I did a whole podcast episode where there's all these different productions in the band, and that's what I kind of like. They got 2 pairs of albums, 3 pairs as far as I'm concerned: Load, Reload, Ride, and Master, and then the latest 2. But everything else is outside of those pairs, and it makes for a lot of variety in the catalog. So I'm going to go 7 out of 10.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Martin. That was great. So we have an average score here of 5.4. which to me just sort of indicates that we're split right down the middle. I think there's a lot of people who really dislike this album, and there's a few people who like it, and a lot of people I think who recognize that, you know, that seems to be a pretty fair, around the 6 seems to be a pretty fair and reasonable place. There are people like me and Martin who you know, can appreciate it a little more, and there's a lot of people out there who really don't like it. But there you have it. There is the Dark Horse review of Saint Anger. I want to thank each of our panelists for being here. This was a really, really fun one. I feel like a 12-year-old kid again, talking about, you know, the new Metallica album, except it's very old now at this point. Anyways, thank you to you at home for watching. If you like what you're seeing, if you like the Contrarians, you can like and subscribe. You can share with your friends. You can join the conversation in the comments. There's ways to support the channel in the description, but mostly just thanks for being here. Have a good one.
All right. Thanks, guys. See you later.